Welcome back. There's often confusion around qualitative research and sample size. Sometimes people look at qualitative research projects with only a few participants and think that there's something wrong with the study. On the other hand, some people talk about qualitative research as if the number of participants doesn't really matter. The key point is that different study designs and different projects have different relationships both to sampling and to sample size. So how many people should I interview for my project? Let's begin by reviewing what is a population. A population is who or what you're studying. At the start of a project using interviews, you can think of your study population as the people you initially want to interview. As I discussed before, a group we wanted to interview in our example project were healthcare providers involved with the transition of patients with diabetes into adult care in Newfoundland and Labrador. Although qualitative researchers usually don't phrase it this way, you could say this group is the population from one part of our study. Sampling is when a researcher doesn't attempt to engage everyone in their study population. Rather, they plan at the start to only engage a subset or a sample from their study population. Imagine we're evaluating a new medication that's supposed to prevent the common cold. We want to know if this medication works across the population, that is, everyone who potentially could catch a cold. But we cannot test this medication on everyone who could use it. There are too many people in the study population for a research team to reasonably engage them all. So researchers, as part of their study design, plan to take only a sample or a subgroup of their population and invite them to participate in the study. Researchers then only study the sample from the population or engage enough people to meet the sample size they plan for. This strategy gives researchers a manageable number of people to engage for their study. But many researchers want to infer something about the whole population from their study of the sample. For example, if the cold medication is shown to be effective in the sample of patients we studied, researchers want to infer that it's also effective for the whole population. But how sure should we be that the result in the sample reflects something about the entire population? With statistics, we can measure the likelihood that the result in the sample reflects the result if we tested the entire population. In other words, if the cold medication is shown to reduce colds by 50% in the sample, we can determine how likely it is that the result is also true for the entire population. By setting a few variables, using statistics, we can determine in advance the sample size we'd need to infer the result in the sample reflects the entire population within a certain level of confidence. For this type of evaluation, a larger sample size increases our confidence that the result found in the sample reflects what would happen if we tested the entire population. In other words, sample size matters for statistical inference. It also seems to make sense that we should determine our sample population in advance and that a larger sample is always better. So how do these considerations apply when determining the number of people to interview for your qualitative study? Many studies do not use samples. For our example study, we wanted to interview everyone who met our inclusion criteria. In other words, the entire population. This choice was made in part because our study population was small enough for us to gauge everyone if they wanted to participate. Because we studied the entire population, considerations about the sample size were not applicable. We did not use a sample, so there's no sense talking about its size. What if we did take a sample for our qualitative research project? In other words, we planned from the beginning not to interview our entire population. Would we always want a larger sample size then? Should we calculate the number of people we would interview in advance? The answer is still likely no to both questions. When conducting a study that uses a sample to infer something about a population, the sample size, and the variables examined are usually set at the start and do not change over the study. This lack of change helps preserve our level of confidence in the inference from the sample. Most qualitative studies are not concerned with statistical inference. They're not concerned with how likely a variable score found in a sample reflects the population. Because they're not concerned with maintaining the confidence of an inference, qualitative projects are usually free to adjust the study population or to add to the number of participants during the study if warranted. Without a concern for inference, even the criteria for selecting participants can be revised while the study is ongoing. The appropriate number of participants and whether they need to be determined in advance depends both on the type of study you're conducting and the specific project. Determining how many people to interview and when in the study they need to be identified should fit with your overall study design. Many qualitative studies are explorative, so that it's hard to determine in advance who exactly should be interviewed. For this type of study, revisiting who to invite to participate based on initial findings is common and can be quite appropriate. Depending on the type of analysis that you want to conduct, for qualitative research, it's even possible to do too many interviews. This situation may occur for a study in which each interview needs to be analyzed in depth. An advantage of a sample size calculation is that it tells you exactly how many people you need to engage in your study. A problem that qualitative researchers face when planning their studies is explaining when they will stop interviewing people. A common proposed endpoint for qualitative data collection is when there's saturation. How saturation is defined varies, but it essentially means that you interview until the point where new interviews either provide no new information or no additions to your conceptual understanding of a topic. But saturation can be hard to determine in practice. Rubin and Rubin suggest keep questioning and interviewing people until you have a good, rich, credible answer to your research problem. While this quote may sound a little vague, I do think it captures the spirit of when you should stop trying to engage more participants. You stop interviewing people when you, as the researcher, think you have a rich enough data set to adequately address your research questions. Compared to the exact number given by a sample size calculation, this more vague description of when you're going to complete your interviews can appear less scientific, but it's in keeping with the best way of addressing your research questions, which should be the most important consideration. Although somewhat vague, it also points to a strength of qualitative research, that developing a better understanding of a topic does not depend on the number of people who you interview. In practice, the determination to stop recruiting people for interviews is usually based on several factors. These factors can include the number of interviews already conducted, the distribution of interviews across the subpopulations that you're interested in, the likelihood of getting more participants, study timelines, the data you already have, the aims of your study. The end of data collection should be discussed and decided on by your research team. The key point is that the decision to end participant recruitment only occurs within many qualitative research projects after recruitment and interviewing have begun. What if you do have to provide the number of expected interviews? For example, as part of an ethics application. You could build an estimate by considering your topic and how complex it is, the type of analysis you plan to conduct, the various subpopulations that you want adequately represented in your study, and your research objectives. You can reference the number of interviews completed in similar published studies. If you're a student, you can discuss your estimate with your supervisor or your research team. But remember that the estimate of the number of participants made at the beginning of a study is just your best guess. It is not something that should drive your investigation or even something you should feel tied to. It may be tempting to say that you're going to interview a large number of people, but entire books have been written based on less than 50 interviews. As long as it fits with your objectives and your overall study plan, reviewers of qualitative research should recognize that many studies will have relatively small numbers of participants. The key is to show that you've considered this important aspect of your study's design. Hopefully this video has given you some insights into the connection between qualitative research and sample size. In the next video, I'll discuss developing your interview questions. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you follow on to the next video.